Hi, everyone. Bienvenue. Welcome. Thank you, everyone, for coming to the 93rd event of Disrupting Disruptions, the Feminist and Accessible Publishing, Communications, and Technology Speaker and Workshop Series. I'm Dr. Alex Ketchum, and I'm a professor of feminist and social justice studies at McGill and the organizer of this series. The Feminist and Accessible Publishing, Communications, and Technology Speaker and Workshop Series seeks to bring together scholars, creators, and people in industry working at the intersections of digital humanities, computer science, feminist studies, disability studies, communication studies, LGBTQ studies, history, and critical race theory. I'm so excited to welcome you all. Some notes on accessibility. As is the case with all of our hybrid and virtual events, we have cart captioning in English tonight provided by our captioner, Sarah. You can turn your captions on at the bottom of your screen. Tonight, we have a Q&A option available. So throughout the event, you may type your questions into the question and answer box, and there will be some time during the second part of the event for Dr. Mél Hogan to answer them. We can't guarantee that every question will be answered, but we are grateful for the discussion that you generate. We have quite a few more events coming up this semester. Our next event is on February 29th. The director, Anissa Najak, will be giving a talk. The event is in partnership with the Indigenous Futures Research Center. On March 15th, we are co-hosting a workshop with Concordia Center for Oral History and Digital Storytelling on queer oral histories. Gabrielle Iaconetti and Liam Devitt will be speaking at that hybrid event. On May 7th, Dr. Ashley Hsu will talk about her new book, Against Techno-Ableism, at 6 p.m. Eastern Time virtually. That event is part of the Ada X HTML's festival, but it's also virtual. You can find our full schedule as well as video recordings of our past events at disruptingdisruptions.com. So that's the redirect URL, disruptingdisruptions.com. The other URL is way too long to remember. You can also find our list of sponsors, including Shirk, Milieu, Raketh, and more. As we welcome you into our homes and our offices through Zoom, and you welcome us into yours, let us be mindful of space and place. As many of you know, past series speakers Suzanne Kite, Jess McLean, and Sasha Lucioni have pointed to the physical and material impacts of the digital world. The topic of the environmental cost of digital technologies will also be addressed this semester in other upcoming events, including, of course, today. While many of the events this semester are virtual or hybrid, everything that we do is tied to the land and the space that we are on. We must always be mindful of the lands that the servers enabling our virtual events are on. Indigenous communities are disproportionately impacted by the mining practices used for the materials that are used to build our computers and digital infrastructure. Furthermore, as the series seeks to draw attention to power relations that have been invisibilized, it is important to acknowledge Canada's long colonial history and current political practices. This series is affiliated with the Institute for Gender, Sexuality, and Feminist Studies of McGill University. McGill is located in Tiohtià:ke, Montreal, on unceded Kanien'kehá:ka territory. Furthermore, the ongoing organizing efforts by Indigenous communities, water protectors, and people involved in the land back movements make clear the ever-present and ongoing colonial violence in Canada. Interwoven with this history of colonization is one of enslavement and racism. This university's namesake, James McGill, enslaved Black and Indigenous peoples. It was part from the money he acquired through these violent acts that McGill University was founded. These histories are here with us in this space and inform the conversations we have today. I encourage you to learn more about the lands that you are on. Nativeland.ca is a fantastic resource for beginning. Now for today's event. Dr. Mél Hogan is the host of the Data Fix podcast and the director of the Environmental Media Lab, EML. She is an associate professor in the Department of Film and Media at Queen's University. Her research focuses on data centers and infrastructure understood from within the context of settler colonial extractivism, planetary catastrophe, and collective anxieties about the future. Thank you so much for being here. I'm so excited for today's event. And again, I welcome you to write questions throughout the presentation into the Q&A box. So Dr. Mél Hogan, please take it away.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Ketchum, and to everyone who helped organize tonight and to the captioner as well. I am going to share my screen with you. All right. Okay, so I've called this talk just simply here. I'm just going to see if there we go. AI and the cloud, and it's their relationship that I want to talk about tonight. Both of these words could be in quotes. They're both metaphors and they're both pretty intense marketing terms. So I want to explore what they are in their own right and to each other. I know that the poster for this talk said that I'd be focusing on the environmental impacts of ChatGPT and AI tech, but what I'd really like for us to take away tonight are two things. One is this idea that AI is not actually ChatGPT or generative AI. Those things are not necessarily interchangeable. And it's also not those applications per se that are wreaking havoc on the planet, though these projects do come at a great environmental cost. I also know that as part of the series, others, including Dr. Sasha Lucioni, and I haven't listened to her talk yet, but I'm a big fan, also give a talk on the environmental impacts of AI. So I'm hoping to offer something else tonight, something that builds from the collective efforts to draw attention to the world of AI as a much bigger issue today than the hype would have us believe. And I'm really grateful to Dr. Lucioni and also so many other critical thinkers in this space, like Zane Cooper and Théo Lepage-Richer and Tamara Nice and so many others. So I'm thinking with them. I've been writing about data centers for about 12 years now. And when I first started just showing an image like this of a data center and saying that our data was stored in there, I remember this being pretty mind-blowing for students and audiences. And as data researchers or data center researchers specifically, we didn't seem to really think too much then about the details of what kind of data was being stored where. The focus was more on this shift from personal data storage, the data that we generate with our emails and videos and cat photos and social media and so on, and all the metadata that came with that. And so instead of these kind of personal hard drives or even saving stuff to your computer, which had its own built-in hard drive, we started moving things to the cloud, or we'd have these kind of subscriptions, or we just didn't even know. We just weren't saving data on our computers anymore. And now we use the cloud, which refers basically to these kind of data storage devices, these hard drives that are basically in these huge stacks inside of these big data centers. So it's just been scaled all the way up. It's managed for you, and it's usually in some unidentified location. So my sense is that now collectively we're much more informed about the materiality of our digital lives, at least to a certain extent. We know about the cloud. And as I was writing this presentation, I was trying to just really try hard to think about what the audience might already know and what they might not know, and how you make assumptions about things that are within your area of expertise and interest. But I think that we are now slightly more concerned about these things and their environmental impacts. And we might even have a sense that there are different types of data centers. So this is the NSA data center in Utah, where mass surveillance is enabled. We might also, have a sense that there's something called Bitcoin mining, or this kind of like energy-intensive process for cryptocurrencies, and that is a particular kind of data center. And on topic for tonight, we might also have a sense that AI is demanding bigger data centers than that one I first showed, which was one of Facebook's second data centers, which at the time was quite big, but now these are growing exponentially. And so, I think that I can safely assume that folks on this Zoom tonight, that your data is stored in data centers. I'd be kind of curious to know when you came to know this, and if you remember when you made that switch to, maybe to Dropbox or iCloud or to Google Drive or something more open source. Of course, with social media, we don't have a choice. They're stored in these proprietary data centers. And if you're someone who follows the topic, I would say more than the average person, you might also spot headlines telling us that data centers are more and more located in all sorts of figuratively and sometimes literally cool places, like in the near Arctic or the Arctic Circle. And a good percentage of this is to reduce spending on cooling. or to promote a kind of data center brand of futurity, or to help mitigate environmental factors of some sort. So you would build a data center in an old bunker or in a church, or even underwater or in wind turbines. These are really just a few among many other examples of attempts to materially and discursively locate and situate data. These are fun stories, I guess, but they do tell us something about the geopolitics and other various investments in the retrofitting of various industries, sometimes in attempts to be quote unquote greener, but it might also obscure other ways, and I would say arguably more urgent, in which AI, as this latest and greatest twist in the story of the internet, is making what we think of data storage into something else, something that merely passes as data. And AI, as I'll show, requires an enormous amount of data to operate, which is why we're basically having to store it everywhere. And one of the things I'm working on these days, so this is very much in process, is to think of AI not only in the terms given to us by the industry or the media, and to think of AI instead as not only deeply changing the political, social, and environmental landscapes, but as those things. So AI as territorial. And where data centers are located as strategic for specific long-term gains, and to figure out for who and for what, who benefits from all of this. There's something in our literacy of data centers and the cloud that also makes the idea of data seem inevitable, as though data everywhere is a condition for this era that we're living in, as something that we can't walk back from. It's sort of the food that feeds the AI beast, and because of this, we're building up infrastructure to accommodate this data explosion. But as I've argued before, we really, really need to think of the cloud as part of what I was calling the data center industrial complex, where we build infrastructure to make basically data an inevitable outcome instead of accommodating the explosion itself. So again, who does it serve and to what ends? So what I really hope to show here is that the cloud is not really a data storage solution, and putting data in wind turbines doesn't really solve any environmental problems. And that AI is not really a computational endeavor. And that's why it's not just a metaphor to say that AI is a bunker or AI is in a church, because it does serve military ends and it is something that is worshipped. So what's hidden behind this vision of data or this world built for AI is what I'm working on these days. And as I hope to really make a compelling case for tonight, that what we're seeing is not great. It's not great. So what are they having us believe that AI is or will become? I'm sure if you're following this, you know that some of the imaginary is this spin that we should be scared of AI bots taking over, either with problems that the industry leaders call alignment, or more viscerally as the dolls and toys that come to life. And we all know how Megan ends. But as Martina Mendola puts it, AI in these forms, quote, speaks to commonly held technophobic concerns, including the dangers of humanizing machines, the consequences of innovation without ethical guardrails, and the fear of losing control of AI technologies. So for AI CEOs like Sam Altman, alignment means encoding human values and goals into large language models to make them helpful, safe, and reliable, or as much as possible. And these seem like good values, but this approach fails to answer the use and purpose of AI in these machinations, which is why, why does it exist in the first place? What problem is it solving and at what cost? And also, it really cleverly makes this kind of AI, our fear of AI, into its own kind of marketing hype. Like, it makes it seem really powerful and makes its potential seem quite immense. So I think, as best stated by Leif Weatherby, quote, AI is already a reflection of actual human values. The fact that that's not good or neutral needs to be taken far more seriously. So basically, AI is already very much aligned with human values. We just can't stand to admit it, that the sum total of contents fed into these AI models reveal and reflect back just a deep, dark misogyny, racism, transphobia, and so on. So we should seriously consider that AI is already a kind of failed prototype in one sense. But we keep investing in it, right? These are like trillion-dollar investments because it's a complicated we here, but we know that it doesn't need to actually work in the sense that these don't need to be neutral, objective, or aligned data sets, but rather to work as being compelling or weaponized. So in other words, generative AI doesn't need to be scientifically rigorous to be socially impactful and effective. So the point I do want to emphasize is that these are ideals of the cloud and its undergirding infrastructure as much as it is about sort of this veneer of AI laid over top. And so it's much more than they are about sentient machines outside of the data center. These are weird ideas about sentience that are themselves brought to life and upheld by mass scale data storage. So basically the ideal that is formed in the cloud is one that sees linear progression, basically in terms of technological progress. So that moves humans as far away as possible from emotion into some pseudo-objective alternative described by the industry in terms of these 6 techno revolutions. So basically, the steam propelled the original industrial revolution, and then electricity powered the second. Preliminary automation and machinery engineered the third. And cyber physical systems or intelligent computers are shaping the fourth industrial revolution, what they call sometimes Industry 4.0, which we can imagine starting at around 2011, focuses on connected technologies such as the Internet of Things and big data. The fifth and sixth are a little more contested in terms of these industrial revolutions. So they're a little bit more wishy-washy, but basically the idea is that Industry 5.0 emerged as a concept looking to complement the technologies of Industry 4.0 with an added focus on human, social, and environmental value. We're supposed to see a harmonization of human and machine intelligence emerge as some kind of imperative for the so-called advancement of humanity. And Industry 6.0 looks to create intelligent systems that can operate with little need of human intervention. This vision is really about creating a fully integrated, quote unquote, smart factories with end-to-end automation, where the remaining human roles primarily involve monitoring, self-orchestrating manufacturing systems situated within these wider intelligent networks. So this vision, so this is the future. This so-called 6th industrial revolution is characterized by using advanced technologies such as quantum computing and nanotechnology, and this would be over the architecture of Industry 5.0. So it portrays the 6th revolution as inevitable while obscuring the assumptions and trade-offs around displaced human skills, human feeling, human enjoyment, humanity, agency, autonomy, and the planet. And more critically, we see the entrenchment of techno-authoritarianism, as Adrian LaFrance wrote about it for The Atlantic. Basically, quote, the systems they've built or are building to rewire communications, remake human social networks, insinuate artificial intelligence into daily life, and more, impose these beliefs on a population which is neither consulted nor usually meaningfully informed. And so there's a couple of other commenters on this, Timothy Cabrew and Emil P. Torres, who have termed this acronym TESCREAL, basically to economize the language and streamline the conversation around these Silicon Valley delusions. The core vision at the heart of all this is transhumanism, which is basically the backbone, is to technologically re-engineer the human species to ultimately create a superior new race of post-humans. So, you know, I don't usually love to give tech CEOs and their delusions too much airtime, but I think critiques of them really are helpful for understanding truly what's underneath all of these infrastructural projects. So So sometimes when I encounter these, they just seem really too ridiculous to be true. But I think we need to take these seriously because they're really what's shaping, disproportionately influencing how the future is going to be built up. So I guess the question here is, how is all of this made possible, and how is it made material? So to go into this, I'm going to use the next part of this talk to basically show you all of the ways that we materially build up AI. So I really hope that you never look at a data center the same way again, and that you see the cloud as a kind of enabling technology for this widespread techno-authoritarianism. So if we go back inside the data center here, you might recognize the colors of Google on the left. And it's also sort of a trademark blue on the right for the Facebook data centers, if you're familiar with that. But despite the promise that is built into these depictions of data centers in images like these that are really modern and clean and colorful, or hyper visual, as Jen Holt and Patrick Frondro once described it, these promise a greener, better future. But it might actually be more realistic to think of data centers as these kind of cogs in a planetary wheel. And when we zoom out, we start to see basically that whenever we use any service on the internet, we're connecting to one of the many millions of servers that are located in one of the many thousands of data centers around the world. And I like this map because it's sort of mapping it through measures of energy use, which we'll get to. And this is a map you can find online through the website Visual Capitalist, and it's drawn from these Cushman and Wakefield reports that do a lot of work to document data centers real estate. And the internet also, you may know this, I'm not sure who knows what here, but what's really interesting to think is also that beyond the data centers, they're all connected by undersea cables. And these cables that are undersea are owned by telecom carriers, and they're almost entirely in the hands of the private sector. And these connect all of the data centers or the cloud globally. So this is a stylized map. You wouldn't, be able to find the cables by trying to go locate them on the map, but it gives you a good idea of the scale. So according to where this map was pulled, there are approximately 574 active cables. And if you look at the image on the right there, that's about as wide as a garden hose. That's what those undersea cables are. That's how thick they are. And they cover about 1.4 million kilometers worldwide undersea. And they're on the seabed, so all the way down. And the total number of active cables is constantly changing as new cables enter service and older cables are decommissioned. So it's not a one and done kind of thing at all. And you can see how vulnerable these cable clusters are. On average, about 1/5, 1/6 of them, so about 100 of them break every year. And the maintenance process is quite involved. You can go on YouTube and find a whole bunch of videos showing you how they repair them. But even when they do work, these cables only last about 25 years, after which they're decommissioned. And so accidents like fishing vessels or ships dragging anchors account for about 2/3 of all the cable breakages. And earthquakes can contribute to some of the damage as well. Sometimes just the underwater components fail. And then shark bites, in case you were wondering, those are exceedingly rare. So what's less discussed on these websites that will, tell you all about the technology is the geopolitical context and things like deliberate sabotage, right? Often when it comes to the cloud, the industry won't draw your attention to its vulnerabilities, and so the internet really is an instrument and infrastructure for warfare. This seems kind of like an aside to the environmental impact question, maybe, but I'll show you how surveillance in the military has always been a crucial part of the internet, and how much more complicated than sabotage it really is. And you'll note that this headline, the story in the middle, is more than 10 years old. So this idea of cables being cut is not a new tactic. So we went underwater, but also in space. So SpaceX, which is led by Elon Musk, is the industry leader in satellites with his company Starlink. And they currently operate the largest fleet of satellites, so about, I think, half of the global total. Satellites are how the internet works in remote areas or when something's on the move. Usually there's more latency issues and it's slower and it's much more expensive, but sometimes that's the only option. And then there's also something I'll just, go through really quickly. All of the devices that are connected to the internet. Sometimes we call this the Internet of Things. They're all connected and hackable. I think the story of the toothbrushes is probably fake, but it comes as a kind of warning to say that as soon as anything's connected to the internet, and and we do know for sure that things like your Alexa or Echo or these devices that you keep in your house are definitely listening to their users, and they are definitely very easily hackable. So basically, we have, we have the data centers, we have the undersea cables, we have the satellites, we have all the devices. But one thing that's super important for AI is also the special kind of hardware, which is basically these AI chips. None of the advances in AI software would be possible without semiconductor chip technology. So without semiconductor chips, you wouldn't have anything like ChatGPT or, as has been making the news in the last 2 days, something like Sora or AlphaFold, if you're more familiar with the health deployments of AI, or Midjourney, or all of those uses of AI. So you wouldn't have large language networks, you wouldn't have large language models, neural networks, or machine learning at the scale required for generative AI without this chip. And what's interesting, in a Times piece, they wrote that of this industry as, quote, on the northwest coast of Taiwan sits the world's most important company that you've probably never heard of. So we don't know about the chips, but we do know about things like ChatGPT. So when I started my talk saying, I want you to leave here thinking of AI as these chip companies, as these geopolitics, and sort of push away the association of AI with ChatGPT. This is sort of what I'm getting at. So we basically, we all got to know AI as ChatGPT because there was so much hype. I think none of us knew really or were interested in AI before 2023, and now all of a sudden we're all sort of in it. We're all sort of like confronted with it, forced to like grapple with its implications. And some universities have even pushed for it to be adopted as a pedagogical tool already, or something to learn to work with, since it's assumed to be here to stay. And I think because universities are themselves making huge investments in AI and its underlying mechanisms in computer science and engineering, AI is this kind of engineering of the future prototype, and it's tested on us and through us. It's been shown to be extractive of artists' and writers' works and totally devoid of ethical oversight, or, as far as I can tell, of any benefits to learning, really. And those issues are important for sure, but my interests tonight are more like these commitments on how all of this is reliant on extraction. So as much as for ideas, images, data, as it is for natural resources, AI is a kind of plundering technology. So where we're being told that universities, perhaps even mostly the humanities, could be early adopters of generative AI, and this would allow us all to write and be creative, I guess, and would be better for pedagogy, it really does also completely obscure its underbelly. And so it's not just, if we think of ChatGPT, we can't think of it as just this kind of surface level innovation, if it can even be called that. According to a paper by Sam Biswas, it outlines all of the imagined uses of something like ChatGPT specifically for the military. And so if you look at that black slide, you'll see sort of these linkages that that are not really brought to our attention when we're just trying to I don't know, write a paper using ChatGPT, if that's something people do. So basically, According to ChatGPT itself, it claims that AI can be used for things like automated target recognition, military robotics, military logistics, information warfare, driverless vehicles, surveillance, lethal autonomous weapon system, battlefield environment support, virtual augmented reality modeling, missile guidance, autonomous flight control, wearable systems. There's so many examples of how it can be used for military warfare. And then we're told that the CEO, Sam Altman, of the company OpenAI, which makes and runs ChatGPT, is going to invest also in the hardware. So currently, TSMC, the company in Taiwan, makes all of the world's advanced AI chips. Most importantly, according to that Forbes article, the middle image, this means that the AI chips from Google, Amazon, Microsoft, and every other credible competitor is made there. And this is also happening as Taiwan and China are nearer to the brink of war than they have been in decades. So this would paralyze the global AI ecosystem. AI companies are investing in material and component parts of the supply chain, which is also a strategy about securing posts in that global network, a move that will invariably have massive economic consequences. But it doesn't end there, as you might have guessed. Basically, in addition to all of these parts I've been talking about, the components, the wires, the chips, the cables, the hard drives, I think that more and more, we also know that the cloud is reliant on extraction of so-called natural resources in order to operate. And so there's been a whole bunch of headlines sort of addressing this, but when we think of the cloud, we think about energy, water, and the environment more generally. This was true before AI. AI seems to have made this a lot worse. So natural resources, quote unquote, are also, especially as they get more scarce, subject to geopolitical tensions. And I think this is, to put it quite mildly, all of these tensions are ultimately over land and territory, where the internet is framed as a kind of lifeline. So global data infrastructure requires a lot of power and a lot of water to operate. And there have been a fair number of studies reported on this in the last few years. So I'll just go over it quickly with you, but basically to give you a sense of scale, data centers have been said to use, the reports vary on this a little bit, but between 2 and 4% of the global energy supply. And cryptocurrencies and AI has increased these percentages quite a bit. Same goes for the cooling of data centers, and the cooling of data centers often requires purified fresh water for cooling, and AI increases this demand as well. So the AI industry is demanding new infrastructure to be built from scratch. In many cases, some of the data centers that I showed you early on, they're not sufficient for the computational power required of AI. So that means an exponential infrastructural growth as well. And my colleague, Anna Valdivia, created this amazing map to make, I think, an equally amazing argument, something that I expand on and find useful for setting the scene. She shows that AI supply chain, quote, makes visible the connection between an engineer training an algorithm in the UK, a miner extracting tantalum in Kazakhstan, an engineer in Mexico working in a data center, a worker in Taiwan manufacturing GPUs, that means graphics processing unit, and a worker in Kenya dismantling e-waste. This obviously is just like a rough sketch, but even as we're sold, again, this idea of AI as a very recent scientific breakthrough or as a kind of computational endeavor, like something you do on your computer, an application like ChatGPT, the map shows fragments of workers and materials in different places that enable AI. So you take this away, there's no ChatGPT. So AI is ultimately material, conditional, strategic, political, and unstable. So I think that these maps show the global entanglements and consequences of data infrastructure in a way that looking at one particular data center doesn't allow for, which is part of the reason I'm switching my focus in my own research. And I think that these maps also hint at the potential for failure or the possible choke points when the infrastructure is laid bare like this. Everything is so conditional, and those conditions are themselves at risk of changing from climate and worsening geopolitical circumstances. So what's really interesting is that there's an entire business of measuring the risk factors that are specifically for the data center industry, I guess for the data center sort of real estate deals. Like where you would locate a data center, you would account for things like political stability, energy security, GDP, bandwidth, tax rates, but also things like education. So just so you know, this is part of the mapping of data centers as well. They use rankings and metrics to basically figure out where to situate data globally. Increasingly, they've also added measures to mitigate things like fires, heat waves, and tsunamis, which is the image on the right. So we see in this very obvious way also that the cloud is itself contingent on more stable or workable planetary conditions. So this in turn means that some data centers have become the safest form of shelter in some instances of storms and hurricanes, like when Hurricane Harvey, which was a category 4 hurricane, made landfall on Texas in August of 2017. It was used to harbor workers and their family, while the surrounding towns like Houston had in some places no water and no electricity, and where people not working in industry had to fend for themselves. Or similarly, as documented by Stephen Gonzalez, the 2022 Hurricane Fiona that devastated Puerto Rico saw the cloud keep functioning despite an otherwise aging energy infrastructure, failing the people living in and around the data center. And these are just two quick examples of how the cloud, and by its nature, AI is tethered to the environment. But these are also, I think, in some ways to highlight that the cloud is built to withstand more of the harsh climate consequences of climate change than the average person or household or community might be. So these data centers are built as these kind of fortresses. They protect data, and they protect the limited number of people who are working for it, who are on the inside of the data center. And so it's not an exaggeration to say that moving forward, environmental extremes will be measured against the resilience of data infrastructure more than the human body. So what I mean by this is, if the data center can withstand a heat wave, good. If the data center can endure tsunami, we're good. If humans can't, too bad. And this is really grim, I think, but this is also exactly what these kind of examples are pointing to. And just as a kind of aside that I thought of as I was writing this, made me think of this slide that I showed earlier, which was the bunker next to the church, and how they sort of prophesized something like this: the idea of the data fortress built over top of existing industries and ideologies and commitments. And what's interesting is that during these storms, both the data center and a nearby megachurch, let in only very few people. I don't know if you're familiar with Joel Osteen, but he makes over $50 million off of church profits, and he shut down the church during the same hurricane. And what's interesting is, to explore maybe the link between Christian fundamentalism, the Houston data center as a shelter, and other extractivist industries. What's interesting about the data center is that it was kept humming because it contains vast amounts of data for the oil and gas industry that's located in Texas. So, okay, so as I hope to have made clear so far, AI is a multi-pronged affair that taps into global economies and industries, and is deeply entrenched in natural resource management and extraction. But I kind of want to make this point even more. And again, colleagues like Zane Cooper and many others are really sort of dealing with these things specifically as well. But basically the idea is that AI is an extractive, is extractivist insofar as it draws on energy resources that runs it, but it's also, and perhaps more importantly, merging with energy companies and other industries of warfare. So I would, it's really important, I think, to think of Google and Amazon and Meta, Facebook, and Microsoft as fossil fuel or as energy companies. I know that Sam Altman, pictured in the middle here, is, investing in his own sort of energy in nuclear fission technologies. And so So this merger of cloud company with energy company is really, really another association to make clear in your mind. So, so it's not just providing big data for those industries, though it does this as well. These companies, these cloud companies, have made things like mining and things like fossil fuel extraction more "quote unquote" efficient, more profitable for those companies. But it's also becoming energy companies. And Brian Merchant called this, I think, is quite a brilliant way to talk about this. He said it was automating the climate crisis, which I would say is also accelerating genocides and ongoing colonization. So just to come to this final section here about the automated climate crisis and the way billionaire delusions lock us into certain futures. Something that I think illustrates this really well is the work of Ingrid Burrington, who is an artist, a scholar, a journalist, and she's done so much to help us read the writing on the wall. So Burrington sees the internet, as it says in this slide here, as the most ambitious terraforming project of civilization. It's become an allegory for colonization and making habitable planet for machines, not humans. Or as James Brittle also explains it, to counter this myth of the digital. He says that we know at a very practical level, we know this at a social, physical level. At the very physical level, our machines are built out of the earth. And this is also an idea supported by the work of Josh Lepowski in his project in bringing the cloud down to earth, which shows more concretely that most of the pollution happens at the site of extraction. So in this slide that I've pulled from one of his talks, it's not so much the post-consumer e-waste disposal that is so often reported on that is the in terms of scale the majority of the problem. It's the extractivist industries that are really at the root of the problem. We can see from this that extraction versus manufacturing versus consumer post-consumer waste, that really the cloud and AI has largely made a hole in the ground. It's really put a dent in the planet. And I situate my newer work broadly along these collective efforts to link AI to its material infrastructure and to link infrastructure to the environment and to the military and to energy industries. And I think the challenge to myself was to take all of this in, this being the work of Valdivia, Gonzalez, Brittle, Lepowski, Burrington, Cooper, Nace, et cetera. There's really so many people I'm not mentioning right now who I'm very indebted to. And to think of AI both in environmental terms, but also on environmental terms. So these would be the terms of the landscape, the terms of the minerals, and the terms of the sea, and so on. So in other words, if the cloud and AI, for that matter, are clever marketing words, maybe we can be more clever even and reclaim how we see, feel, and challenge these exploitative, extractive colonial ideologies. As I found in a tweet on etymology from 2016, which says a cloud was originally a rock, which lends itself well to thinking about how rock moves and settles, and how the CPU, the central processing unit of electronic devices, is also at its core, and this is a quote from the other tweet, literally a rock that we tricked into thinking. And so for now, I've, basically this idea of derived the cloud as a mass stone. For now, I've conceptualized and adopted the idea of data sediment as a kind of framework for studying the cloud in this AI era. And again, it's just to move away from that, the way we're being told the story of AI. And if anyone else has used this idea of data sediment, let me know. I don't need to be the first or claim this concept. I'm just finding it very useful for thinking about this on environmental terms. I'm interested in the obvious relationship between rock sediment, but also to but also to settlements in terms of colonization. The made-up idea of the uninhabited space taken, transformed, or terraformed to settler colonial purposes. And I'll just leave you on this final slide here, but basically this idea of sedimentation, it's a simple metaphor, and maybe it's also more elemental and useful for feeling our way through this current AI imposition predicament. I'm not sure what to call it. It speaks to how ideas and practices accumulate over time and how they harden into accepted norms and assumptions, much like layers of sediment and internet cables deposited on the seafloor. Belief systems, technologies, and politics become embedded and compressed into a foundation that feels solid, real, if not permanent. Yet no sediment is fixed forever. Nothing stays sedimented for long before the current sweeps through, carrying new potentials to be consolidated and normalized until the next paradigm shift inevitably remakes the landscape again and again. So in National Geographic, which is quoted here, it says sediment is defined as solid material that is moved and deposited in a new location. So I like this idea of sediment because it offers a really compelling, I think, a really compelling way for understanding something like AI in various states of movement as drags, moraines, deposits, or dunes, as something that evokes being worn down, but also accumulative, as something elemental, but also a product of erosion and vulnerable to ruin. So thank you. I'll leave you there on that tonight.
Thank you so much for that wonderful presentation, and I really appreciate all the different threads that you pulled together. We already have a question written by an anonymous attendee, so thank you so much for those first questions. I also want to welcome everyone to write your questions into the Q&A box. We have a half hour plus of question time, which is very exciting to have with Dr. Hogan. So I'll begin by reading the first question. Dr. Hogan, you can also see it if you click on the Q&A.
Okay.
So an anonymous attendee writes, how should we understand attempts to bring chip manufacturing home to Western colonial nations, e.g. the US's CHIPS Acts, within this highly privatized but also highly geopoliticized environment, particularly in terms of how material extraction patterns might not change?
I mean, it's a great question. I think like what I'm trying to push back against is this idea that AI is like a given, something we can't walk back from, something that we need to accommodate and sort of problem solve as though it is something that we've decided, you know, we need to build up. So I think it's a really interesting question. I think this is going to be sort of like one of the battles of our time will be where those AI chips and I think there'll be other innovations, and there already have been from those chips, but I think, I mean, I'm just trying to reread the question here. So, how should we understand attempts to bring, I mean, I'm not sure that it's so much to bring them home to the US as it is to have US control over them. So that's one thing that maybe someone actually knows a bit more about the plans. I know that Sam Altman is now trying to both invest in that Helios company to, you know, for energy. And I know that he is also trying to raise $8 trillion. I mean, these become so like these numbers are so big, they become so abstracted. So I think and I'm saying these two things because there's also just so much hype around the ways in which these various industries are sort of made to be important by their self-valuation by the CEOs of those companies. So I don't know that we should believe even at this point that there will be any kind of attempt to bring those chips home. On the other hand, to have anything sort of concentrated, you know, and entirely dependent in one place is probably problematic and would be best sort of parsed out. But like all of this is extremely extractive. So even to sort of problem solve where and how, like even the building of these silicon chips or these chips is so horrible for the environment. So to say, well, we'll just like solve the problem of geopolitics. I don't know. It's just like hard to get there without sort of undoing so many other things. So I don't know if that anonymous person wants to like say more to it. I mean, I'd be interested in their answer, but I don't know. Yeah.
Awesome. I'm going to ask a question now. I also want to note that Ushni says if we can have data bricks, data lakes, data dams, data sediments can be a useful concept as well. So thanks, Ushni,
Oh, for
for
sure.
that
I have a
comment.
lot of slides on all the ecological metaphors of data. So yeah, that's yeah.
Um, I have a question. So I was really interested in some of the comments you made, kind of linking some like the religious aspects of it with the church and the symbolism. And I know you also have a project that you're working on like extraction and beliefs. And so I'm wondering if you can expand a little bit on those connections that you're making between extractivism and religion and data centers.
Oh, I wish I could bring in my collaborator for this one. We have just it's with Jacqueline Jenkins, and we have just basically pitched this project, sort of like to launch it, to start it. So I can't say much about it now, but it really the idea is to, yeah, it's called Extracting Beliefs, and it's to attempt to, especially in Canada, in sort of the various industries. When you drive, I just moved from Calgary to Ontario. And so it was very apparent that there are religious political beliefs that are intermeshed with various industries here. And so this is something that we were going to explore in relation to also the sort of the new sort of investments in cloud in Canada. But it's too new to really say more than that. But there's definitely that aspect of that's very apparent when you drive across Canada, that there is a sense of like, the political and the sort of like religious are, they're very connected in interesting ways. But yeah, that's sort of a to be continued kind of, that project is sort of what we're pitching to work on. Yeah.
Awesome. Great. Esley, do you want to read Joanne's?
Yeah, I also have a question for
Oh,
afterwards.
you go do your question first.
Okay.
And then
Okay.
Joanne's.
Great. Yeah, I was kind of wondering what you thought about the issues around the visual barriers and understanding like the vastness of data, especially when you were talking about like wind turbines and infrastructure being retrofitted, and even just the fact that a lot of these data centers just look very like concrete and they don't really kind of demonstrate like the amount of energy it takes to create them. And so I'm just kind of wondering like if you have any ideas about like overcoming these visual barriers to the public, like how do we convey that in a different way?
Yeah, I like this question. It makes it seem like if people have more energy, they would react differently, or that kind of literacy would empower people in some ways. And I know that Dr. Luciani has talked about these kind of industry measures, that kind of like the kind of certifications you would have on buildings or whatever. And you could have the same for large language models to say like how much water, how much energy it's using. I'm just not sure in terms of its activist potential for us to have, like, it's not by lack of information that we are a little bit powerless against these, trillion-dollar companies. So I don't know what that would do per se. And I think it's more about, what I was hoping to do tonight, which is to get, sort of a general public not thinking of AI in terms of the hype and the promise, or something like ChatGPT, like that it's actually a massive infrastructural, political, geopolitical project. So I don't know. I mean, I don't know about, I know that there have been sort of artists and other sort of folks doing data center tours and like really sort of teaching people how to read a building as a data center with particular kind of vents and things like that. But those companies also make their energy and water usage. They don't make it, it's not really made public. And often when it's made public, the measurements are not entirely reliable. And so there's a lot of self-reporting. So yeah, I think there's an interesting component of like literacy, but I think it would come more from like understanding these projects critically than just saying, okay, this is using this much water, this is using this much energy, this is what it's used for. So I think it's like we're not there yet. Like I think that's like that's a very hopeful, like, that's a very lovely, hopeful sort of place I think we can get to. But I think for now, it's like this is a beast, and we need to push back against this idea that it's inevitable, that it's good for humanity. I think we have a lot of work to do to get there. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think I'll
Yeah.
go ahead with Joanne's question. And so they say, great talk. Here's a related thought. Even though corporations claim that they are interested in mitigating climate change, most of them have pressured their workers to return to workplaces and not take advantage of the work from home opportunities that were put into place during the pandemic. Why can't we take advantage of the internet and be able to work from home, saving gasoline and reducing the amount of office space needed? Thanks.
I mean, I love this question because I also think that it has revealed that these are not solutions to problems. They're not, you have something like Zoom that like means people don't have to commute, means that they don't have to be with people who are not using protection measures, not masking at work, et cetera. So it's a solution to many things to use something like remote work. It's also enables people to participate when maybe they couldn't get there in person. Like there's all sorts of reasons to use these technologies. They do offer solutions to a lot of problems. But I think what we see is that, what we're sort of fighting against are these capitalist ideals that are pushing people back into these particular kinds of norms that serve interests that are not those of the workers. Like to put it very simply, I think that to look to these industries, to these products, to these companies to make our lives better is a real misunderstanding of what they're here for. Yeah.
Thank you. I'll read the next question. So it comes from So Young, who writes, thank you for providing a perspective on AI at a more infrastructural and material level. I hadn't really thought of it from that perspective before. I also believe that current generative AI operates as a black box with a tremendous data set. How can this black box type of data be related to any infrastructural and material sense?
Okay, so this is a colleague of mine. Thank you for coming. So I'm just going to read the second part of the question. So how can this black box type of data be related to any infrastructure material sense? So I'm not 100% sure that I understand the question as it was asked, but I'm just going to guess, I guess, at an answer. But I think, again, speaking sort of on Zoom like this, I don't know what people already know, but AI, has scooped up, the contents of the internet to train large language models. So it's basically just like grabbing a bunch of text and images and video, and it's sort of like using that as data, as fodder for other types of projects. So it learns off of that through all kinds of like, algorithmically, whatever, other sort of like technical advancements in terms of like how it understands data in relation to other data. And so materially, I think that it's because of this sense that it requires, just in their ideal, endless amounts of data. So that I think would be the infrastructural and material sort of, thing that we need to accommodate is that these, I was trying to hint at this, is that they'll say, oh, well, yeah, ChatGPT, even today, there was a piece that it went off the rails, like that it started spewing like nonsense. And it's this idea like, oh, it's just because we don't have enough data yet. As soon as we give it more data, as soon as there's this like ideal of endlessness that will perfect it and make it into this vision that these CEOs have, apparently, that like all language meaning can be at some point met at a mathematical threshold, which everyone has been pushing back against and saying it's kind of like nonsense. But I do think because that aspiration is there, however misguided it is, the sort of black boxness around the size of the data sets is to fulfill this dream of endless input. So we just need a little bit more, just a little bit more. But I think in the sense it's like it pushes big real estate and infrastructural projects if it's never quite enough data yet, right? We need to accommodate. We're just going to need more and more and more. So I hope this answers your question. So John, I don't know. Thank you for commenting.
So I also encourage people to continue writing in your questions. We really appreciate it. We have a brand new one. Oh, Esley, did you want to read this one?
Sure, it comes from Praveen and they ask, thank you for the insightful talk. Given how opaque big tech are about their data center infrastructures to the public, what do you think about their sustainability claims?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, because I've been working on this for more than a decade, and I remember going to these kind of data center industry conferences, the idea of being more environmentally friendly was there from when I first started researching data centers. They just didn't know how to offload that cost onto their customers, onto the clients. So the push to make things more environmentally friendly is there, but that doesn't mean that I believe the claims. If you can Google the Meta sort of environmental report, the Google environmental report, they all have a framing and a kind of metrics. And there's like Ann Pasek and a bunch of her colleagues also write about sort of the ways in which these emissions get reported on, and these measures around efficiency and these kinds of concepts. So I would say that, of course, it's a particular narrative about what they think they need to do and where they're getting their energy from that is not fully transparent. On the other side, I would say there have been improvements in energy efficiency of that industry, but mainly because that's also profitable and less expensive to run and so on. So no, I don't believe much that comes from big tech self-reporting. A bit skeptical of that. Yeah.
The next question from an anonymous attendee also kind of deals with like kind of corporate, the
Okay.
corporate landscape.
Yeah.
And this person writes, what would you suggest to those who are convinced that the breakthrough is just around the corner and are willing to give just a little bit more of their data money to these projects?
I love the question because it's always like, it's just, what would I suggest? Beyond, as a scholar, I do think that what I'm trying to counter is some of these ideas, and it's like I kind of don't blame the public because the mainstream media also plays into a lot of the hype and the promise. And we're living in really tough times, so who wouldn't want to break through around the corner? Like, it serves some sort of like emotional need also to wait for the techno fix to sort of pull us out of this particular predicament. The problem is, from my perspective, and what I research, is that that's sort of also the predicament itself. The problem itself is that we have overinvested in technology and infrastructure, and we have disinvested from the social, political side of things. And most of our problems are actually, social political problems, if you ask me. So what would I say to them? Just that it's a misguided idea, and I mean, there's so much amazing critical work coming out that sort of pushes back against this hype. So I would say, join us, come on board, there's a lot. Yeah.
Oh, perfect timing. We just got another one. So keep the questions coming, y'all. Okay. Yeah. Esley, did you want to read this one?
Yeah, and this comes from Deanna. And she says, thank you for your talk. In the process of undertaking your research, have you been able to have conversations with people directly related to the cloud computing industry? This is such important critical work. I'm curious if you've seen openness to real conversation about the related social and environmental issues that doesn't sublimate critical engagement.
Yeah, I mean, I've been studying this for a long time. I've been to many, many data centers. I've been to some in Luleå and basically in the near Arctic Circle. I've been to some in Chicago. I've been to many data centers and have chatted with people, who work in different sort of spaces of the data center, from engineers to people sort of on the floor doing the management, to people doing some of the more conceptual work. And like, I want to say, like, these are not like, they're not monsters. These are all people who want to live on a habitable planet. And a lot of people working in those industries believe that it will play a certain role in solving, in helping with scientific and technological breakthrough, for sure. It's the problem is more, I would say, it's like less that those particular workers, and much more about the problem of capitalism, and the sort of the real shift to billionaire, trillionaire, big tech concentrations of power. So it's not that some of these components are not workable. I actually sort of believe that we can materially respond in really interesting ways to some of the problems that we have. It's just to not make things become obsolete, to not to use materials that will, withstand the test of time, to not have things be replaceable, like to not sort of fall into the things that capitalism usually derives profit from, which is basically chucking, buying a new phone every year, chucking it. Like, we can make a phone and then we can make it last for a very long time. So it's not against the industry or the workers or the materials per se. It's against the wasteful ideologies and the billionaire, trillionaire concentration of power, I would say. So yeah, somewhere in there. Yeah.
To follow up on that, before I get to the next question, so you had talked about the unevenness of like that everyday person trying to push back on these like trillion-dollar like industry tech CEO people. And I mean, right now you were also just talking about some of its better design, some of it's focusing on maintenance and repairability and stuff like that. But in addition to that and raising awareness, what do you see as next steps for pushing back on some of these technologies? And I know it's one of those questions that's like, hey, can you fix all these problems for us? But just to hear some of your thoughts on it.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely there's really the work of critical scholars, and I would say it's like pretty interdisciplinary, so it's very cool. And I would say, like, again, Sasha Lucioni, others, they're engineers, and they're also critical, like they're intervening at this like very like almost doing like a political economy of the industry. It's phenomenal. It's so good. So many women, so many queer folks, so many folks of color. Like, it's just like it's good. Like, there's good momentum. There's a lot there's a lot of like people invested in pushing back against this this sort of hype, because it's still in the relatively early days, right? And so I think the work is happening. So there's that. I also have been for a long time documenting all the various artists who are working specifically in and around data centers. It sounds niche, but there are hundreds of like art projects that make us see and understand that infrastructure differently. And if anyone wants to write to me, I can share lists, or if you go on my website, you'll see critical studies of the cloud. There's tons of artists working on this. Maria Santa Maria, does tours and shows people. And there's tons of like these activist groups in Ireland that Patrick Bresnian and Patrick Brody and all these other folks are writing about. So there's sort of on the ground activism, grassroots. There's the artists working, I'd say pretty globally on this. And then there's critical scholars in interdisciplinary fields. So, is it enough? We're sort of out, we're like small potatoes, but I do think that changing the way people like understand and conceive of things like AI can really be effective as well. Yeah.
Thank you. I know that's always like a tough question, but an anonymous attendee writes, from the environmental perspective, if we ignore generative AI as more of a sleight of hand distraction, is there a conceivable tipping point where the benefits of tech, like accelerated machine learning, might find more beneficial solutions than negatives of the extraction?
Yeah, I mean, it's like generative AI is extremely terrible for the planet. So I know that I made it seem like at the very beginning, like, I was trying to say, like, it is a disaster for the planet. It's completely unsustainable as it is now. It's only going to grow but there's so much more that is so much more extractive and so much worse. So I didn't mean to say it all that generative AI, because that's also at the scale that it's at now, just growing and growing, growing. So it's just unsustainable. So I didn't mean to imply at all that that was like a mild thing. It's not just a foil. I just think it serves, something like ChatGPT serves to kind of like draw our attention to something that's a little bit dumb, a little bit fun, probably gonna, make the life of professors and coders and some other artists and writers more complicated. It's not really like bringing anything useful to humanity. So no, I think it's a disaster on many levels. The question disappeared, but I think the idea was, could there be some possible benefits to AI? And again, I'm like, yeah, I think so. Thought of outside of settler colonialism, thought of as outside of capitalist models that only see, I mean, we're talking about trillions of dollars now, like in these investments. Like, I think, again, it's not the technology, it's not the materiality, it's the system undergirding all of this that I would say this is the thing we need to sort of like draw attention to.
We have another question from Praveen as well. What do you
Okay.
think contributes to the public perception that the cloud is ethereal?
Like other than the name itself. I think, yeah, okay. So I think it's like a little bit of wishful thinking. It's a bit of the idea of that paperless office. It's a bit of the perpetual promise of big tech. It's just basically, saying hand over your stuff as a kind of convenience and we will deal with it in this really modern, this really reliable way, and kind of leave the mess to us. And so I think it's about convenience, and I think it's about this sense that it's like, I mean, it's true that we use paper less, we use pens less, like we have moved to the cloud, and we are not confronted with I mean, I would like to know how many people on this call have ever seen a data center. Like, we're not confronted with the space that hosts and maintains and duplicates and creates like 12 versions of your last email in case there's power failure there or that one catches on fire, right? So I think everything contributes to that fantasy, and yeah, I think it's very clever actually in the marketing. Yeah, it's funny to be asked questions and not to be able to say, what do you think? But I would ask Praveen, like I would ask all these people what they think, just so you know, as you're listening.
Definitely. So we don't have any other questions from folks in the audience. Now we just got another one. Okay, cool. So we'll probably like have maybe one or two more questions and then wrap up around that, because we've been grilling you for about quite a long time with questions.
They're
So
good. They're
anonymous
good.
attendee, right, is doubtful that high-tech companies will advertise that they have been sabotaged, but have you uncovered some potential attacks? Could there be an anti-AI militancy in the offing that would use attacks on data centers for political purposes?
Yeah, well, I think like I think in 2015 I wrote this paper that was really sort of fun to think through, because it was about the NSA data center where all the mass surveillance, and it was just after Snowden had come out with revelations about how the US was spying on its citizens, and this was enabled by these at the time cutting edge data infrastructure. And what was really interesting is the activists there were onto the fact that that data center required water from the river to cool the data centers. And so they had thought that one clever way would be to shut off the water to the data centers so that none of the surveillance could happen. And so that was sort of one approach that they had borrowed from other kinds of activist interventions. But of course, tech companies, I mean, so you can tap into the material. So in part, like, if you think in Canada, no government employee can have TikTok on their phone. It's because that's like one way of sort of intervening, spying, whatever. You can also, if you're buying equipment from, I don't know, another country, that country can have built-in components that would be used for a kind of spying, which is a kind of sabotage or security risk. But you can also tap like you could tap into those cables that I showed or into to the material infrastructure. So when you go into a data center, it is very, you know, the people there have their retina scans, their fingerprints, so like very high security. And in part, it's because you can tap into the materiality as well. As a kind of attack, you can listen in, but you can also create interventions like these DDoS attacks, or basically sending tons and tons of emails to a particular website to take it down. You can spam, you can, you know, do phishing. Like there's all sorts of ways in which you can tap into the material infrastructure. So either through through something like TikTok, or through something like a hard drive, or through tapping into a cable. So yeah, it's very fragile. It's very like susceptible to those things. And I guess to come back to this idea of the cloud as you know, it's sort of like the reason a company would not advertise this is because the cloud is supposed to be safe. It's supposed to be, you know, it was created sort of for the military because of its ability to disperse information and to provide redundancy and to like be decentralized. So you couldn't attack one part of it because it was okay because it existed, like the information existed in other places. So, yeah, so I like this question because it's both like showing that it was designed to be a little bit like more clever than an attack on any particular part of the material infrastructure, and on the other hand, it would be because it is so dispersed and so invariably material that you can actually in some ways tap into it. So yeah.
Thank you. I'm just gonna give folks another moment to like write it's your final chance if you have a question. And I'm just going to say that I really appreciate in your presentation how you were really highlighting the connection of AI technologies and military, especially because oftentimes in early internet histories, right, there's the focus on ARPANET and the development of the internet through military means. But I feel like sometimes that part of the story gets lost quite a bit when we're getting to kind of like data centers and AI in more current times. So I really appreciate that. I know that wasn't a question. I was trying to give
it's fine,
space, but I also really appreciate that. It doesn't look like anyone else has written anything. So yeah, so, and Esley, are you good with your questions too? Okay, awesome. Well, I want to thank you so much for being here. This was a wonderful presentation. Thank you everyone who came. We will share the recording soon. I know some people had asked that in the chat. I want to thank our captioner, Sarah, and please come to our future events. Thank you so much, everyone. I hope you have a great evening.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you so much, Dr. Ketchum, and everyone who helped make this possible.